Hello everybody, I'm back. We're going to talk about a musician that I have known about since I was in high school. And I knew about his group and everything because they were unusual. This guy was at the forefront of what we would call the jazz rock movement, which probably started, after 1970 with Weather Report and Return to Forever and, so many other highly electronic groups, the Mahavishnu Orchestra, etc. But this artist, he started moving in that direction in the middle 70s, somewhere around 1967. He started a group that used an instrument that jazz musicians were frowning on, although unfortunately somewhere along the line, we just accepted it. So in jazz, you had to play acoustic instruments. That's just that. You played a string bass, upright bass, contrabass. But this guy selected a bass player who only played electric bass. And he did something else that bass players don't do. He had a 5-string bass. And not that he wanted to add a low string, like they do the D string, get that rumble. No. He wanted a high C string so he could play way, way up high. And I know a majority of my friends who are bass players considers that sacrilegious. Now, his bass player's name was Steve Swallow. And he was part of a group that included an old seasoned drummer, Roy Haynes, and a guitar player who became a fixture on the rock and jazz rock and fusion scene, Larry Coryell, and the subject of this discussion, a vibraphone player from Anderson, Indiana, who played with a peculiar method. All the vice players before him played 2 mallets, 1 stick in each hand. But this guy was self-taught. And he developed a style of playing 2 sticks in each hand because his early influence in jazz were piano players. And he wanted to sound more like piano players, and since piano players got 10 fingers, he figured he at least needed to have 4 sticks. And that's what he did. Now, as I said, he was from one of those little towns in Indiana. You have to be careful with Indiana. It's a strange state. Very diverse. I think that's a polite word to use these days. But a lot of people in Anderson, Indiana, and a lot of people listening to this don't understand what Anderson represents. You see, Anderson is named after Chief John Anderson, who was the offspring of a Delaware Indian mother and a European father. So we had this cultural exchange taking place at the most intimate level 200 years ago. So I am sometimes distracted by the people who think that mixed race or mixed culture are people some kind of weird, because this goes back over 200 years. So there's nothing new in America, by the way. That's what I'm saying. So he probably grew up in that town, graduated from high school in 1960, and never heard one word about the origin of the name Anderson, Indiana, like most of us. So I thought I'd just throw that in to give you a little bit extra information and give you something to think about the legacy of our country. It used to be called, the motto used to be, E pluribus unum. Go look that up. It might help you a little bit. Now, my friend, jazz friend, Gary Burton, as soon as he got out of high school in 1960, he decided he wanted to get serious about it because he was self-taught, didn't have any formal music education. So he went to the Berklee School of Music, from 1960 through 61. And obviously he learned a lot. Matter of fact, before he went, while still in high school, he'd already been offered a record contract because his style, the four-mellow style, was so unusual and he was so good at it. He could sound like a piano. Independent lines everywhere, big juicy chords that no one else could get on that instrument. As a matter of fact, his four-mallet grip was even different than the one used by classical players, and a lot of classical players adopted what became known as the Burton grip because in many players' hands it felt superior to what they had been using for a few years, because after all, the vibraphone was not created until the mid-30s. So it was a fairly new instrument and people were trying to learn how to make this thing work. So here we are. He goes to Berkeley for a couple of years, and then I guess while home for the summer, he decided to go up to Indiana University for a jazz clinic. And in those days, there weren't many of those. And this one was being led by the legendary Stan Kenton and his band. They were one of the first big bands to do these clinics. And so Gary Burton went to this clinic to learn. But somehow, by the end of that clinic, he wasn't just a young student learning. Stan Kenton had hired him as a member of his traveling professional band, just for showing up. That's how impressive Gary Burton was at 20 years of age. So he goes out with Stan Kenton, and being very reflective, he decided that he wasn't ready. So he worked with a guy named Herb Pomeroy, who was not a vice player. After all, vice players couldn't teach him anything because he wasn't playing the instrument like they did anyway. But Pomeroy was a great musician, composer, arranger, great trumpet player, and all that theory stuff, that composition stuff, he wanted that. So there you go. He starts doing that whole thing, composition and this and that. And he caught the attention of a young lady who was a pianist and probably had one of the most popular jazz radio shows of all time, nationally syndicated. Her name was Marion McPartlin. That's her name for the records, ladies and gentlemen, Marion McPartlin. Go look her up if you don't know her. And she had a friend named George Shearing. Of course, everyone knows George Shearing, the English jazz pianist and classical. And she recommended Gary Burton to really modernize his sound and, expand things a little bit, which he did. And he and Gary toured together all over the United States and Japan. And finally, when Shearing heard about Gary's skills as a composer, remember he had spent that time with Herb Pomeroy, he said, man, I got a project for you. He says, what? He said, I want you to watch me, listen to me, and then I want you to write my next album. He said, what do you mean? I want you to write all the songs on my next album, and I want them to be individual, original pieces that come out of your mind. Okay. So he did it. The album was a smash success. Never heard anything like it. And it was called Into the Woods. The Shearing thing worked really well for him. And then always being pragmatic, always having an ear and eye out for the future, and always being the experimenter, he could see the jazz rock fusion thing coming from a long way away. So he formed that group his first group, the Gary Burton Quartet, with Steve Swallow, Larry Coryell, and Roy Haynes. And their first album was called Duster. And it was pure fusion before the word fusion even existed. Yeah, he's creating a whole new world for himself because he is that unique. And that went for several years. Roy Haynes was still recording in his middle 80s. These guys are what I call soldiers in the what I call the jazz army. Soldiers. Now Gary continued to do what he do, and after he made enough money, he probably didn't like the road and, you know, trains and buses and planes and all that. So he returned to Boston. Now he only did 2 years there at Berkeley, but when he returned as a professor of jazz, yes. And not only did he teach jazz percussion, but he also taught improvisation, which means kids who were not percussionists, trumpet players, sax players, bass players, piano players, they could all study with him because he is teaching the one thing that ties all jazz together, which is the spirit of creativity, which we call improvisation. Later, he becomes a dean at the Berklee School of Music. And finally, he becomes executive vice president of the Berklee School of Music, one of the most renowned schools in the country. This guy with a high school education and not even a bachelor's degree. And finally, at his retirement, Berklee gave him an honorary PhD. They appreciated everything he did. He continued to play in different ensembles with different people, all kinds of people. And he played everything. Let me tell you what, this is one of the funniest things. Has anyone ever heard of Boots Randolph? Most people have not heard of Boots Randolph, but I had a kid who thought Boots Randolph was a jazz saxophone player, and it took me 4 years to talk him out of it. He had been convinced by his parents that Boots played jazz. Okay, but Boots was actually a country western sax player. And his most famous tune was Yakety Sax. You all probably know that one. Boots, early in the career, while he was having slow time, and this is before the fusion band, I must add, encouraged him to move to Nashville and play with guys that were working in the studios there. And the first guy he met was a guy named Red Garland, a guitar player, who played country and rock and jazz. And the first recording that Gary ever made was with Red Garland. And Floyd Kramer was there. He recorded with him on piano. And he even recorded and played with Chet Atkins during that particular period. So once again, Gary Burton had a wide range of experiences. And if you ever have been anywhere near Anderson, Indiana, you probably realize it was an easy move for him to go from the jazz he was studying to country and western, because that was probably the most popular music in Anderson, Indiana. Now, Gary continued to record and play with various groups, mostly his own. He worked as a sideman. He recorded 71 albums, a lot of recording. He really documented his work. There were like 30 recordings he did as a sideman. And then there were 6 compilations that he did over that period of time. Let me mention this since it's local. There was a pianist I used to see all the time when I was working with the Church of Scientology as a musician. Great pianist and a great human being. His name was Chick Corea. I wish I had known that Chick Corea and Gary Burton had a partnership that lasted for 40 years. They recorded and performed all over the world over a period of 40 years. I didn't know it until I did this research. I also did not know that Gary Burton won 7 Grammy Awards during his life. And 6 of the 7 were won with Chick Corea. So I guess they really did have a great relationship. Go find that music. Chick was great. Gary is great. He's still with us. But the marriage of the two minds, soul, spirits, music, the way they communicate with each other and weave in and out of each other's mind and heart and soul is special. And maybe that's why of the 7 Grammys, 6 are with this particular grouping, Gary Burton, Chick Corea. Here's the last part of this. There have been very, very, very few recordings, groupings, concerts with a duet of piano and vibes. It's normally piano and bass or something, but piano vibes, similar textures, but a wide range because each of the instruments are so expressive. Most people have slept on Gary Burton because of all the time he spent working in education. Go listen to him. I guarantee you, it will put a smile on your face and in your heart. Thank you very much.